The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of alien beings filled the floating platforms that hung in the air like islands of judgment. Dr. Sarah Chen stood alone at the center of it all, her hands clasped behind her back as she waited for the verdict that would decide humanity's fate. The Zephyrian Chancellor rose from his crystal throne, his three eyes glowing with ancient authority. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Representatives of the Galactic Council, after 3 cycles of deliberation, we have reached our decision regarding the human species. Sarah felt her heart beating faster, but her face remained calm. She had expected this moment for years. Around her, the alien delegates leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear the judgment that would reshape the galaxy. The humans stand accused of excessive aggression, dangerous technological advancement, unpredictable expansion, and concerning adaptability, the Chancellor continued. In less than 100 Earth years, they progressed from primitive flight to faster-than-light travel. In 30 years, they colonized 12 star systems. Their military tactics have impressed even the Krellian Empire, a species known for its warrior culture. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Krellians, massive beings covered in battle scars, nodded their approval. Even they found human warfare methods unsettling. The evidence speaks for itself, said Ambassador Vex of the Crystalline Consortium, his body shimmering like living diamond. When the Helix Corporation attempted to claim the Kepler 442 system, the humans didn't negotiate. They didn't appeal to this council. They simply arrived with a fleet and took it by force. Sarah spoke for the first time in hours. The Helix Corporation was enslaving the native population. We freed them and offered protection. Every action we've taken has been in response to aggression from your member species. That is precisely the problem, hissed Representative Slath of the Serpentine Alliance. You act without permission. You make decisions without consulting this council. You refuse to follow the established order that has kept peace in this galaxy for 10,000 years. The Chancellor raised his hand for silence. Dr. Chen, you may present humanity's final defense. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Honored delegates, you speak of order and peace, but what kind of peace allows slavery? What kind of order permits genocide? In our short time among the stars, we've encountered 17 species that were being systematically destroyed by council members. We've found slave markets operating under council protection. We've discovered experiments on sentient beings conducted by your most respected scientists. The hall erupted in angry voices. The Chancellor's eyes blazed brighter, demanding silence. You call us aggressive, Sarah continued, but every conflict we've engaged in was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. You call our advancement dangerous, but we've shared our medical technology freely. Our fusion reactors have ended energy crises on dozens of worlds. Our food production methods have eliminated hunger on planets that had starved for centuries. And that is exactly why you must be stopped, declared Supreme Commander Carthan of the Void Hunters. You change too much too quickly. You disrupt the natural balance. Species are meant to develop slowly under careful guidance. You humans reject all guidance and forge your own path. Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made several delegates shift uncomfortably. You're right, Commander. We do forge our own path, and we saw this decision coming long before you made it. The Chancellor leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean that while you've been debating our fate for 3 cycles, we've been preparing for it. You see, humans have this habit of learning from history, and history taught us that when people in power feel threatened, they try to eliminate the threat. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small communication device. The chamber's security systems immediately activated, but Sarah made no threatening moves. She simply pressed a single button. Protocol Exodus is now active, she said calmly. Thank you for making our decision easier. The Chancellor's 3 eyes widened. What is Protocol Exodus? You'll find out soon enough, Sarah replied. But first, let's hear your verdict. I'm curious to see how close our predictions were. The Chancellor looked around the chamber, then back at Sarah. Her confidence was unsettling, but the vote had already been taken. By a count of 734 votes in favor, 113 against, and 0 abstentions, this council hereby declares that humanity and all human colonies shall be quarantined within their current territorial boundaries. All contact between human space and Galactic Council territory is hereby forbidden. Any human vessel found outside the quarantine zone will be destroyed without warning. The chamber fell silent. Many delegates expected the human representative to rage, to plead, to demand an appeal. Instead, Sarah Chen simply nodded. The vote was closer than we predicted, she said. We thought it would be 800 to 50. It's nice to know that 113 species still believe in justice. She looked directly at the delegates who had voted against the exile. Your kindness won't be forgotten. She turned back to the Chancellor. You have 48 hours to evacuate any non-human personnel from our territories. After that, anyone remaining will be considered to have chosen to stay with us. We won't force them to leave. You speak as if you have a choice in this matter, the Chancellor said. Your species is being exiled. You will remain in your current systems and have no contact with galactic civilization. Sarah's smile grew wider. Oh, we're leaving, Chancellor. But not because you told us to. We're leaving because staying would mean accepting your version of civilization. And frankly, we've seen what your civilization produces. We can do better. She activated her communicator again. Admiral Torres, this is Ambassador Chen. The Council has voted for exile as expected. Initiate full evacuation procedures. I want every human ship, station, and settlement emptied within 72 hours. The communication device crackled with static. Then a gruff voice responded. Understood, Ambassador. The fleet is already moving. Our guests might want to watch their long-range sensors for the next few days. They're going to see something interesting. Sarah turned back to the assembly one final time. Distinguished delegates, you wanted us gone. Consider your wish granted, but remember this moment, because you're about to learn the difference between exile and liberation. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back. Oh, and Chancellor, you might want to start monitoring your rim territories more carefully. You're about to discover that there are worse things in the dark between stars than aggressive humans. The only difference is we used to be the ones standing between you and them. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving the Galactic Council to contemplate what they had just unleashed upon the galaxy. 18 months had passed since humanity's exile, and the Galactic Council had almost convinced itself that the human problem was solved. The quarterly reports from the quarantine monitoring station showed exactly what they expected. Empty space where human colonies had been, silent comm channels, and no signs of faster-than-light activity within the former human territories. Supreme Admiral Keith Varr of the Council Defense Fleet reviewed the latest surveillance data from his command ship orbiting the Nexus system. Everything appeared normal. Too normal, perhaps, but that was to be expected when an entire species simply vanished from galactic civilization. Admiral called his communications officer, a nervous Altarian with 4 arms and skin that changed color with emotion. Right now, that skin was shifting from blue to a worried purple. We're receiving distress calls from the outer rim territories. Kethvar turned from the viewing port, his massive frame casting a shadow across the bridge. As a member of the Titan species, he stood nearly 3 meters tall and was built like a living mountain. What kind of distress calls? Ships going missing, sir. Entire colonies going dark. The pattern started 6 months ago, but it's accelerating. In the past week alone, we've lost contact with 12 separate systems. The Admiral frowned. The outer rim was largely uninhabited, used mainly as mining operations and research stations. It was also the region of space closest to where humanity had been exiled. Show me the data. The main display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red markers indicated the missing ships and dark colonies. The pattern was clear. The disappearances were moving inward from the galactic edge, like a wave approaching the core systems. Sir? The communications officer continued, his skin now a deep purple indicating extreme anxiety. We've also received some unusual reports from the few survivors we've managed to rescue. What kind of reports? They speak of ships that move faster than our sensors can track. Weapons that seem to unmake matter at the quantum level and... The officer hesitated. Humans, sir. But not like the humans we knew. The survivors say they've changed somehow. Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine despite his species' natural resistance to temperature changes. Changed how? Before the officer could answer, an alarm began blaring throughout the ship. The tactical display lit up with warning symbols. Admiral, shouted the sensor operator. Massive energy readings detected at the edge of the system. Something big is coming out of hyperspace. How big? Kethvar demanded. Sir, the readings don't make sense. It's larger than anything in our databases. Larger than a council dreadnought. Larger than a space station. It's The sensor operator's voice trailed off as the main display showed what was emerging from hyperspace. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a structure that seemed to bend space around itself, its surface reflecting stars that weren't visible from their current position. The geometric patterns covering its hull shifted and flowed like living mathematics. "By the seven suns," whispered Kethvar. "What is that thing?" "It's broadcasting on all frequencies," the communications officer reported, his skin now a pale white. "The signal is coming directly to us. Put it through." The bridge filled with the sound of static, then a voice that was unmistakably human but somehow more than human. It carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible with biological vocal cords. "Greetings, Admiral Kethvar of the Council Defense Fleet. This is the human vessel Transcendence. We come bearing information that your government needs to hear." Kethvar stepped closer to the communication console. "This is Admiral Kethvar. Identify yourself." "How do you know my name?" "I am Marcus Torres, though I am more than I was when we last met." "As for how I know your name, Admiral, we know many things now. We've had 18 months to explore the dark spaces between galaxies. We've found things there that your council never imagined." The Admiral remembered Admiral Torres from the Exile proceedings. He had been the human military leader who oversaw their final departure. But the voice on the comm system sounded different somehow, as if it came from someone who had experienced things beyond normal comprehension. "Admiral Torres, your people are in violation of the Exile order. You are outside your designated territories." "Our designated territories no longer exist, Admiral. We dismantled them and took everything with us when we left. But that's not why we're here." The voice paused. "Tell me, have you noticed any unusual activity in your rim territories lately?" Kethvar glanced at his tactical display, still showing the red markers of missing ships and dark colonies. "What do you know about the disappearances?" "We know what's causing them. More importantly, we know how to stop it. The question is whether your council is wise enough to listen." "Explain." "The galaxy is older than your historians believe, Admiral. Much older. The empty space between galaxies isn't empty at all. It's full of things that used to live in our universe but were pushed out eons ago by species that thought they were protecting themselves." Kethvar felt his blood growing cold. "You're talking about the Void Seekers. Those are myth stories to frighten children." "Are they? Then how do you explain ships vanishing without a trace? How do you explain entire colonies found empty, with no signs of struggle but also no signs of life?" The Admiral had no answer. The reports from the Outer Rim had described exactly those scenarios. "The beings you call Void Seekers are real, Admiral. They're ancient, they're hungry, and they're moving back into our galaxy. The only reason they haven't reached your core systems yet is because something has been holding them back." "What?" "Us, humanity. We've been fighting them in the dark spaces for 18 months. But we can't hold them forever, not alone. Your council has a choice to make." The massive alien structure on the display seemed to pulse with energy, as if responding to Torres's words. "What choice?" Kethvar asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew the answer. "You can maintain your exile order and face the Void Seekers alone when we finally fall to them. Or you can acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, you made a mistake. Maybe humanity wasn't the threat you thought we were. Maybe we were the solution to a threat you didn't even know existed." Kethvar stared at the impossible ship on his display. Everything about it violated known physics, yet there it was. If humanity had achieved this level of advancement in only 18 months, what else had they discovered in the dark between galaxies? "I need to report this to the Council," he said finally. "Do that, Admiral. But don't take too long. The Void Seekers are patient, but they're not infinite. Eventually, they'll realize that we can't guard every entrance to this galaxy. When that happens, your exile order won't matter anymore. Nothing will matter except survival." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Kethvar looked around at his crew, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in their faces. "Set course for Nexus Prime," he ordered. "Maximum speed. The Council needs to hear this immediately." As his ship turned toward the galactic core, Admiral Kethvar couldn't shake the feeling that the next few days would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. Humanity had been exiled for being too dangerous to coexist with galactic civilization. Now it seemed they might be the only thing standing between that civilization and complete annihilation. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in record time. Admiral Kethvar stood before the assembled delegates, his massive form dwarfed by the vastness of the chamber. but his presence commanding attention. The holographic displays around him showed the data he'd gathered: missing ships, dark colonies, and energy readings that defied explanation. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," he reported. "In the past week alone, we've lost contact with 47 installations. The pattern is consistent with the humans' claims about these void seekers." Chancellor Zephyran leaned forward on his crystal throne. "You believe these human stories about ancient beings from beyond our galaxy?" "I believe the evidence, Chancellor. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive energy signatures moving through the void between galaxies. Whatever is out there, it's real, and it's heading toward our space." Ambassador Vex of the Crystalline Consortium shimmered with agitation. "Even if these beings exist, why should we trust the humans? They could be working with these creatures. This could be an elaborate deception to force us to lift the exile." "With respect, Ambassador," Kethvar replied, "the humans don't need deception. The ship I encountered was beyond anything in our databases. If they wanted to attack us directly, I don't think we could stop them." Supreme Commander Carthan of the Void Hunters stood up, his scarred face twisted with anger. "You're suggesting we beg the humans for help? After we voted to exile them? I'm suggesting we consider the possibility that we made an error in judgment." The chamber erupted in voices. Some delegates argued for maintaining the exile at all costs. Others worried about the implications of the Admiral's report. A few suggested launching immediate military operations to investigate the Rim territories. The debate was interrupted when every communication system in the chamber activated simultaneously. The image that appeared on the screens showed a human, but one changed from what the delegates remembered. Admiral Torres looked younger than he should have. His eyes held depths that seemed to reflect distant stars, and when he moved, space itself seemed to bend slightly around him. "Distinguished delegates," Torres said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber's crystals ring with sympathetic vibrations. "I apologize for the intrusion, but time is running short." Chancellor Zephyran's 3 eyes blazed with fury. "This is a violation of Council sovereignty. How did you penetrate our security systems?" "The same way we've been penetrating the Void Seekers' defenses for the past 18 months, Torres replied calmly. "Technology that you would call impossible, but which is necessary when fighting an enemy that exists partially outside normal spacetime." The image changed to show views from the edge of the galaxy. Massive shapes moved through the void, each one larger than a moon, their surfaces crackling with energy that seemed to devour light itself. "These are the Void Seekers," Torres continued. "They were the dominant life form in this galaxy billions of years ago, before the first species achieved consciousness. They were driven out by an alliance of ancient races that sacrificed themselves to complete the task. Now they're returning, and they remember what was done to them." The display showed one of the creatures engulfing a space station. The structure simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but unmade at the quantum level. "They don't just kill," Torres explained. "They erase. Every ship they take, every colony they consume, is removed from existence so completely that reality forgets it ever was." The missing vessels, Admiral Kethvar reported. "They weren't destroyed. They never existed." Representative Slath of the Serpentine Alliance hissed softly. "If these beings are so powerful, how have you been fighting them?" "Because Exile taught us something valuable. When you're cut off from galactic civilization, you're forced to look elsewhere for allies and knowledge. We found the ruins of the ancient races that originally drove out the Void Seekers. We learned their methods, improved upon their technology, and in some cases, we became more than they ever were." The image changed again, showing human ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality, their hulls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "We've been holding them at the galactic rim, but we can't do it forever. There are billions of them, and they're learning from each encounter. Soon they'll adapt to our countermeasures, and when that happens, they'll pour into this galaxy like a flood." Ambassador Vex's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Torres replied, and the simplicity of the answer surprised everyone. "We're not here to negotiate or make demands. We're here to inform you of the situation and offer you a choice." "What choice?" Chancellor Zephyran asked. "You can maintain the exile order and prepare to face the Void Seekers alone. We'll continue fighting them in the outer dark as long as we can, but eventually, we'll fall. When that happens, they'll have a clear path to every inhabited system in the galaxy. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Or, prompted Supreme Commander Carthan, or you can acknowledge that perhaps your concerns about humanity were misplaced, not because we've become less dangerous, but because you now understand what true danger looks like. We can work together to drive back the Void Seekers permanently. But it will require cooperation on a scale this council has never achieved. Torres paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on every delegate in the chamber. I want to be clear about something. We're not asking you to trust us because we're the same species you exiled 18 months ago. We're not. The experience of fighting beings that exist outside normal reality has changed us in ways that even we don't fully understand. We're asking you to trust us because the alternative is the complete extinction of all life in this galaxy. The display showed new images. Human settlements that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, humans working alongside machines that moved like living crystal, and most disturbing of all, humans whose bodies flickered between solid matter and pure energy. The old humanity is gone, Torres continued. We became something more because we had to. But at our core, we're still the species that couldn't stand by and watch others suffer. We're still the ones who fight for those who can't fight for themselves. The only difference is that now we have the power to make that fight matter on a galactic scale. Chancellor Zephyran looked around the chamber, seeing uncertainty and fear on every face. If we agree to work with you, what guarantee do we have that you won't simply conquer us once the threat is ended? Torres smiled, and in that expression was both warmth and something that might have been pity. Chancellor, if we wanted to conquer this galaxy, would we need to ask permission? We've spent 18 months learning to exist in the spaces between realities. We've mastered technologies that make your most advanced weapons look like stone tools. We could appear in every council system simultaneously, and there would be nothing you could do to stop us. The truth of that statement hung in the air like a physical weight. But conquest was never our goal. It never has been. We want to build something better than what existed before, a galaxy where species work together not because they're forced to, but because they choose to, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them, where advancement benefits everyone, not just those in power. Torres leaned forward, and his image seemed to step out of the screen. The vote that exiled us was 734 to 113. We remember every species that voted for our exile, and we remember every species that stood with us. But we're not here for revenge. We're here because the galaxy is in danger and we're the only ones who can save it. He straightened and his form began to fade. You have 72 hours to decide. After that, we'll have to make our own choice about how to proceed. Choose wisely, distinguished delegates. The future of every living being in this galaxy depends on it. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council faced a decision that would determine not just policy, but survival itself. The council chambers had never been so divided. For 60 hours, delegates argued, negotiated, and threatened each other as they tried to reach a decision. Some species demanded immediate surrender to human demands. Others insisted on fighting both the humans and the Void Seekers. A few suggested attempting to use one enemy against the other. Chancellor Zephyran had not slept in 3 days. His 3 eyes were dim with exhaustion as he called for the final vote. Around him, the delegates from 847 species prepared to cast their ballots on humanity's ultimatum. Before we vote, announced Ambassador Vex, his crystalline form flickering with nervous energy, I want to share the latest intelligence reports. The main display activated, showing footage that had arrived just hours before. It was taken by a deep space probe at the very edge of the galaxy, and what it showed made several delegates cry out in horror. Thousands of Void Seekers moved through the emptiness between galaxies, each one the size of a small moon. Their surfaces pulsed with energy that seemed to devour light itself, but worse than their numbers was what they were doing to space around them. Reality itself appeared to be unraveling in their wake, leaving behind a void that was more than empty. It was an absence so complete that it hurt to perceive. They're not just approaching, Vex reported, his voice tight with fear. They're bringing something with them. Our scientists believe they're carrying fragments of anti-reality, spaces where the fundamental laws of physics simply don't exist. The image changed to show human ships engaging the Void Seekers. The human vessels moved in impossible ways, phasing in and out of existence. their weapons firing beams that seemed to solidify space itself around their targets. But even with their advanced technology, they were clearly outnumbered. Intelligence estimates suggest that humanity can hold them for perhaps another month, Vex continued. After that, nothing will stand between these creatures and our core systems. Supreme Commander Carthan of the Void Hunters stood up, his scarred face grim. I've spent my entire life preparing for war. I've fought against pirates, rebels, and rival species. But this is beyond warfare. This is a fight for the right to exist. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who had been his enemies just days before. I hereby withdraw the Void Hunters' opposition to cooperation with humanity. Whatever they've become, they're still our best hope for survival. One by one, other military leaders followed suit. The Krellian Empire, the Serpentine Alliance, even the isolationist Crystal Consortium, all announced their willingness to accept human leadership in the fight against the Void Seekers. But not everyone was convinced. Representative Malak of the Hegemony Core Worlds rose from his platform, his mechanical body gleaming under the chamber's lights. You're all fools if you think the humans won't simply replace one form of tyranny with another. They've already demonstrated power beyond our understanding. What's to stop them from ruling us all once this threat is ended? The same thing that stopped them from ruling us 18 months ago, came a new voice. Everyone turned to see Dr. Sarah Chen materializing in the center of the chamber. But like Admiral Torres, she had changed. Her form seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and her eyes held depths that reflected not just stars, but entire galaxies. Dr. Chen, Chancellor Zephyran said, his voice carefully controlled. You appear different. I appear as I am, she replied simply. The process of fighting beings that exist outside normal reality tends to change those who survive it. But my purpose remains the same as it was 18 months ago, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. She gestured, and the air around her filled with holographic displays, showing human activities throughout the galaxy. Medical teams treating plague victims on distant worlds, engineers building water purification systems on drought-stricken planets, teachers establishing schools for species that had been denied education by their governments. While we've been fighting the Void Seekers, Chen continued, we've also been working to address the problems that this council has ignored for millennia. Slavery, genocide, exploitation, we've ended them wherever we've found them. Representative Malak's mechanical form clicked and whirred with agitation. Without permission, without following proper procedures that allowed those crimes to continue for thousands of years, Chen replied. Tell me, Representative, how many slaves were freed through your proper procedures? How many genocides were stopped by your careful deliberations? The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the answer. None. This is exactly what we feared, Malak continued. You act without authority, impose your will without consent. You're tyrants who believe your power gives you the right to remake the galaxy as you see fit. Chen's expression didn't change, but the space around her seemed to deepen. You're right, Representative. We do have the power to remake the galaxy. Would you like to see what we could accomplish if we chose tyranny over cooperation? The chamber filled with new displays. Fleet movements that showed human ships could appear simultaneously in every system in the galaxy. Technological demonstrations that revealed weapons capable of moving stars. Engineering projects that could reshape planets in a matter of hours. We could conquer every species in this galaxy before your fleets could even assemble, Chen said quietly. We could impose our will on every world, every government, every individual. We could become the very tyrants you fear. She gestured again, and all the displays vanished. But we won't. Not because we lack the power, but because conquest was never our goal. We want to build something better than what existed before. A galaxy where species work together because they choose to, not because they're forced to. Chancellor Zephyran leaned forward. And if we choose not to work with you? Then you'll face the Void Seekers alone and will mourn what might have been, Chen replied. But we won't abandon our principles just because you reject our offer. We'll continue fighting in the outer dark as long as we can, not because we expect gratitude, but because it's the right thing to do. Representative Malak's form sparked with electric discharge. You claim moral authority, but you're asking us to surrender our sovereignty. I'm asking you to grow up, Chen said, and her words carried a weight that made the entire chamber shudder. For 10,000 years, this council has maintained order through fear, oppression, and willful ignorance. You've allowed countless atrocities because addressing them would have required you to change, to sacrifice some of your comfort and power. She turned to address the entire assembly. The Void Seekers aren't just a threat to your territories or your governments. They're a threat to the concept of existence itself. Fighting them requires unity of purpose that your current system cannot achieve. It requires leaders who are willing to make hard choices and accept responsibility for the consequences. And you believe humanity should provide that leadership? Asked Chancellor Zephyran. I believe someone has to, Chen replied. If you have a better candidate, I'm willing to listen. But choose quickly. We estimate 26 hours before the Void Seekers break through our outer defenses. The chamber erupted in frantic discussion. Delegates who had been enemies for centuries found themselves forced to work together. Ancient grudges were set aside as the reality of extinction focused their minds. Finally, Chancellor Zephyran called for order. The time for debate has ended. We will now vote on the proposal to accept human leadership in the fight against the Void Seekers, with the understanding that this arrangement will be reviewed once the immediate threat has passed. The voting process took only minutes. When it was complete, the Chancellor announced the results with a voice that seemed to age him centuries. By a vote of 844 in favor, 2 opposed and 1 abstention, this council accepts the proposed alliance with humanity. Chen nodded solemnly. Thank you. I know this wasn't an easy decision, and I want you to know that we don't take the responsibility lightly. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The humans you knew 18 months ago were just the beginning. What we've become in the dark between galaxies is only the first step in our evolution. But no matter how much we change, we'll always remember that our strength comes not from power over others, but from our willingness to stand between the darkness and those who cannot defend themselves. As she faded from view, the council delegates began the massive task of coordinating their forces with humanity's. None of them could have predicted that this moment would mark not just the beginning of a war, but the birth of a new type of galactic civilization. A civilization where the strong truly did protect the weak, and where the greatest power belonged to those wise enough to use it for the benefit of all. 6 months after the Galactic Council's desperate vote, the galaxy bore little resemblance to what it had been before. Human ships patrolled trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for centuries. Former slave worlds now thrived under protection that no one dared challenge. Scientists who had been suppressed by their governments found themselves welcomed in research facilities that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the war against the Void Seekers was far from over, Admiral. Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display that showed the current state of the conflict. The battle lines had stabilized, but at a terrible cost. 3 entire spiral arms of the galaxy had been evacuated as humanity fell back to more defensible positions. The Void Seekers had adapted to human tactics faster than anyone had anticipated. Admiral, called his communications officer, we're receiving a priority transmission from the human command ship Synthesis. The main screen activated to show Dr. Sarah Chen, though she bore even less resemblance to her original form than before. Her body seemed to be composed of living starlight, and when she moved, space itself rippled around her. Admiral Kethvar, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple locations simultaneously. We need to discuss the situation. Dr. Chen, Kethvar replied, trying to keep his voice steady. The changes in humanity continued to unsettle even their allies. Our latest reports show the Void Seekers have broken through the Kepler defense line. Are your forces falling back to the Sol perimeter? No, Chen said simply. We're not falling back anymore. The tactical display updated to show human fleet movements that defied all conventional strategy. Instead of retreating, human ships were advancing directly toward the largest concentration of Void Seekers. That's suicide, Kethvar protested. Intelligence estimates put their numbers at over 50,000 vessels in that sector alone. Intelligence is correct, Chen agreed. But numbers aren't everything, Admiral. We've learned something important about the Void Seekers during these past months of fighting. The display changed to show detailed scans of the enemy creatures. Kethvar had seen these images before, but now additional information overlaid the visual data. Energy patterns, quantum signatures, and mathematical equations that hurt to look at directly. They're not actually from our universe, Chen continued. They're fragments of a different reality, one where the fundamental laws of physics operate differently. That's why they can unmake matter. They're imposing their universe's rules on ours. How does that help us fight them? Because we've figured out how to do the same thing in reverse. The screen filled with images that Kethvar's mind struggled to process. Human ships that seemed to exist in multiple realities simultaneously, weapons that fired beams of pure mathematical concepts, soldiers who could step between dimensions as easily as walking through a doorway. We've become natives of the space between realities, Chen explained. When you fight beings that exist outside normal physics, you either adapt or you die. We chose to adapt. What are you saying? I'm saying that the war is about to end, Admiral. But the aftermath, that's going to be complicated. Before Kethvar could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout his ship. The tactical display lit up with energy readings that exceeded anything he'd ever seen. Admiral, shouted his sensor operator. Massive reality distortion detected throughout the combat zone. It's like space itself is being rewritten. The main screen showed what was happening at the battlefront. Human ships were no longer firing conventional weapons. Instead, they were projecting fields of altered reality that transformed everything they touched. Void Seekers struck by these fields didn't just die, they were converted, becoming part of the new reality that humanity was imposing on the galaxy. By the seven suns, whispered Kethvar. What have you become? What we needed to become, Chen replied. But that's a conversation for later. Right now I need you to relay a message to the Galactic Council. What message? Tell them that the Void Seekers are no longer a threat, but also tell them that the galaxy has new rulers now, whether they realize it or not. The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar staring at a tactical display that showed human forces systematically converting Void Seekers across multiple star systems. Within hours, an enemy that had threatened to unmake reality itself was being absorbed into humanity's expanding sphere of influence. 3 days later, the last Void Seeker fell. But by then, it was clear that humanity had won far more than just a war. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human representatives had appeared simultaneously in the government centers of every council species. They weren't demanding surrender or imposing occupation forces. Instead, they were simply present, available to help with any problems that arose, ready to mediate disputes, capable of enforcing decisions that had previously been impossible to implement. The transformation of galactic civilization wasn't dramatic or violent. It was subtle, inevitable, and ultimately welcome. Planets that had struggled with resource shortages found themselves connected to trade networks that spanned multiple dimensions. Species that had been locked in ancient conflicts discovered that their disputes seemed petty when viewed from humanity's expanded perspective. Dr. Sarah, Chen stood in the same chamber where she had been condemned 18 months earlier, but everything had changed. The floating platforms that once held alien delegates now accommodated beings who existed partially outside normal space-time. The crystal throne of the Chancellor had been replaced by a nexus point that connected to decision-making, networks spanning the entire galaxy. The transition is nearly complete, she reported, to the assembled representatives. Crime rates are down 97% across all monitored systems. Poverty has been eliminated on 612 worlds. We've ended 3 genocides and prevented 12 more. Ambassador Vex, his crystalline form now enhanced with quantum processing nodes that allowed him to think at multidimensional levels, flickered with what might have been contentment. The results are impressive, but many of our people are concerned about the pace of change. Change is always frightening, Chen acknowledged, but the alternative was extinction. Not just for individuals or species, but for the concept of existence itself. She gestured, and the chamber filled with displays showing the new reality they had created. Stars burned brighter and more stably. Planets that had been barren now bloomed with life. Space itself had been subtly altered to make faster-than-light travel safer and more efficient. We didn't conquer your galaxy, she continued. We saved it. And in the process, we've given every species the opportunity to become more than they ever imagined possible. Chancellor Zephyran, his consciousness now distributed across multiple quantum states, spoke with a voice that harmonized with itself across dimensions. And what of humanity? What becomes of the species that has reshaped reality itself? Chen smiled, and in that expression was both infinite wisdom and eternal compassion. We become what we've always been, Chancellor. The ones who stand between the darkness and those who need protection. The only difference is that now we have the power to make that protection absolute. She turned to address the entire assembly. The age of exploitation is over. The age of scarcity has ended. The strong will protect the weak not because they have to, but because they choose to. And every species in this galaxy will have the opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become part of something greater than themselves. As she spoke, representatives across the chamber began to understand what had really happened. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had elevated it. They had taken a civilization built on fear and competition and transformed it into something based on cooperation and mutual advancement. The Exile order that had driven humanity into the dark between galaxies had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. By trying to remove what they saw as a threat, the Galactic Council had instead created their own benevolent gods. And as the reports continued to arrive, crime ending, hunger disappearing, wars stopping before they could begin, it became clear that humanity's rule wouldn't be temporary. It would last as long as there were beings in the galaxy who needed protection. In other words, forever. The great irony wasn't lost on anyone who remembered the original vote. The Galactic Council had ruled to exile Earth because humanity was too dangerous to coexist with galactic civilization. They had been absolutely right. But they had never imagined that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe is hope backed by unlimited power and the will to use it wisely. The age of humanity had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.